from the Newswires, powered by Kangaroo Fern Media Lab.
You could now spend a year in an Indonesian jail if you're caught having sex outside of marriage. It's part of a new criminal code approved by
Hi, this is
Parliament on
Miko
Tuesday.
Santos, and welcome
It also
from the
bans couples
Newswires.
together.
And for today's episode, we're talking about the recently passed a criminal law in Indonesia banning cohabitation between unmarried couples. Well, our expert for today is Professor Colin Brown. So he is the professor of Griffith University and have worked at numbers of universities in Australia and Indonesia since 1974. And he is the professor of Department of International Relations at Bandung, Indonesia. Please welcome to the show, Professor Colin Brown. How are you, Professor?
Thank you, Nico. I'm fine. Yourself?
So this is very controversial law that passed today or in Indonesia. Can you tell me around the background of this law? As of now, a lot of different organizations are protesting about this.
Yes. Well, what Indonesia, until now, there's a whole set of laws in Indonesia, civil laws, which have been carried over from the Dutch administration. It may seem curious, but it's now 80 odd years since Indonesia became independent in 1945. But much of the legislation is still the same as what the Dutch had introduced in the 30s and 20s and so on. So the idea was to get a new set of laws in which would repatriate legislation in a whole wide range of areas, make it Indonesian, get rid of this last remaining element of Dutch colonialism, if you like, in Indonesia. And there's been attempts to do this for a long time now. And finally today, or was it yesterday? Today, I think, the Parliament finally approved a bill which would indeed replace the old Dutch criminal code with an Indonesian one. So that's what they've been doing. And it's highlighted a number of areas where, in some cases, the law was already there, but I think most Indonesians might have been unaware of it. And it's changed others. But as I say, the basic aim of the exercise is to replace Dutch law with Indonesian law.
Okay, so these new laws also apply to Indonesian and foreigners alike. So what's going to be, because the new code will impose a penalty up to 12 months jail for sex outside the marriage. What's going to be an effect this on international relations?
Well, I mean, of course it affects foreigners in Indonesia. Any law in Indonesia affects everyone who's in Indonesia, same as any Australian law affects anybody who's in Australia. It does have a provision which wasn't in the previous legislation against sexual relations outside marriage. So let me slightly rephrase that. The old legislation did have a prohibition on adultery, that is, relationships outside marriage of people who are married, but it extends it now to sex between people who are unmarried and have no other marital connections. Yes, that is something which foreigners will be subject to as much as Indonesians. The one redeeming factor is, though, that you have to be reported to the authorities by someone as committing these offences. And in the case of someone alleged to be having sex outside marriage, that's effectively defined as either your parents or your children, which is a very curious, well, maybe to us, a very curious way of restricting it. Whether, in fact, that will be followed, I don't know. But the legislation does restrict the people who can report such activity to the police. I don't say that in defense of the legislation, because I think, quite frankly, it's legislation Indonesia could well do without. But I think in most cases, most foreigners are not going to be caught in that way.
Okay, yeah. So aside from this new law, is also includes penalty for criticizing the president or government minister or institution. So some human rights organization that is like freedom of speech was not there.
And I would agree with them. Again, insulting the president has always been an offence, or it has been since Indonesia has been around. It's actually slightly tougher. Oh, sorry. The news legislation makes it tougher to prosecute someone on that now because the case must be brought by the president, him or herself. But no, look, I would agree. I think it ought not to be the case that merely insulting an office holder should bring you into contact with criminal law. But as I say, that's the way the law has been framed for a long while. What we're seeing now is people becoming more aware of the fact that that's the law, but it's not of itself a new development. But I certainly agree. There's been a lot of debate about this in Indonesia, and a lot of people are, in my view, quite rightly, arguing that this is a limitation on the freedom of speech and should not be used to protect any government official from legitimate criticism.
So, Professor Colin, what is the danger of these oppressive laws?
Well, you've given the answer in a sense in the way you've worded the question. The danger is that these laws are used oppressively. The government argues, believe us, we're not going to use them oppressively. Governments always say that. Australian governments say that. Indonesian governments say that. The danger is, though, that either the government deliberately or some of its officers uses the flexibility in these laws to oppress people, to take away rights which are probably not liable to prosecution. I mean, for instance, there's a law that says, part of this law says, you must not take part in a demonstration which has not been previously advised to authorities. It says that you are protected from being prosecuted for insulting the president if you do that in a legal demonstration. There are all sorts of ways in which these kinds of regulations could be misused or used oppressively by state apparatus. And I think that's what people are concerned about. It's not just the law. The law itself has got quite a bit of flexibility in it. It's the way in which the law may be interpreted or applied by state apparatus in the future. That's what I think people are worried about as much as what's in the law itself. So it's both the law and the way the law might be interpreted and applied, which I think has got a lot of people quite concerned.
So, do you agree with the the opponent of the bill saying it represents a huge setback to the retention of democratic freedom won after the fall of authoritarian leader Suharto in 1998?
Personally, as a non-Indonesian, I would say I think it's a regrettable step, a regrettable move, because I think it does limit at least the spirit of many of the freedoms which Indonesians had won following the overthrow of the Suharto regime. I would say again that quite a lot of this legislation was in fact already in place. So it's not a matter of bringing something new. It's a matter of changing the language of the old one. But there are some new elements to it. As I said, sex outside marriage. So yes, I think this is a regrettable move. Whether it's the biggest threat to Indonesian democracy since 1998, well, that's a matter of judgment. But I think it's a significant one. And I think it's one which is completely unnecessary. In other words, I don't think that the state of Indonesian politics or state of Indonesian society is improved by this legislation. And the danger is that it can be used, as we've been talking about already, repressively against people merely exercising what, in other words, in other senses, would have been regarded as ordinary freedoms to act, to speak, free of threat of law, free of the threat of punishment.
Thank you for that, Professor Colin. So, next question I have is: some hotel owner in Bali or metropolitan Jakarta are saying because of this law now, it's risking losing some visitors. Do you agree with that?
Well, they're certainly saying that, and time will tell whether this happens or not. I mean, a lot will depend on how the law is enforced. The law doesn't actually come into effect for another 3 years, so we'll see what evolves over that time. There's a lot of people in Indonesia. There are a number of people in Indonesia talking about taking parts of this legislation to the Constitutional Court and seeking them to be declared unconstitutional. I would think that the likelihood that this law is going to have a significant impact on foreign tourism is probably not very great. But at a time when Indonesia is fighting to try to restore its foreign tourist numbers, anything which threatens those numbers is going to be seen as unfortunate, to say the least. So while I think the threat may not be quite as big as they suggest, I would certainly have sympathy with any hotel owners in Indonesia who are saying nothing that happens. Sorry, can I say that again? I'd certainly sympathise with any hotel owner in Indonesia who says they don't want to see anything which threatens the revival of foreign tourism into Indonesia, because it's their livelihood and the livelihood of many other Indonesians being threatened.
Thank you so much, Dr. Colin, Professor. Thank you so much, Professor Colin Brown, for your insight about this law that was passed today. Thank you.
Thanks, Miko.
Thank you so much. This is another episode from the Newswires at redwires.au. Thank you.